Well, hello, Shiny Crafty People. It's Tim Totten here, and welcome back to the channel. Today, I want to teach you how to make a very simple starter quilt top. Something that will be attractive, but also will make it really easy for you to pick those fabrics and super simple to lay it out. And we're going to start with a very simple, just a quilt of squares. Now, I'm going to put a link in the description below to several of these layer cakes that I purchased on Amazon, and these were really great because they have already picked out the color fabric choices for you. So to give you an idea, a layer cake is a pile of fabrics. You see all the different choices here that are 10 inches square. So these things are all 10 inches square. I just measured it on my table to make sure it was 10 inches. And this pack has something like 50 or 40 something pieces in it. Now this is all a section of red fabrics, as you'll see. So I'm not sure I want to do this one unless I was really doing a quilt for somebody who loved reds. I might use this pack that I purchased. This has floral pre-cut fabric squares, 10 by 10, and they're blue-gray fabric. So I'm going to bring you down to the table and show you what these look like. So here's this set of 10 by 10 squares, and you'll notice that they've all have, their edge has been cut off with a pinking shears, but this has quite a few choices available, and usually there's like 2 pieces of each fabric in here. So you'll see there's this one, and then a nice gray and flowery design, and then it changes to a different gray flowery design. This is sort of the idea. It's blue grays florals, and there's all these different choices, although this one appears to have more than 2 of the same fabric in it. So maybe some of them they have more, or they doubled up. I don't know. That looks like 4 of that particular one. But they just keep giving you different options of different fabric choices. And what I really like about this is that you can get a coordinating set of fabrics together, and all these fabrics are going to coordinate in a specific way. Look, and then we get into the light blues here, and these are in fact the same fabric pattern as this one here to that one. I'll give you a little better angle of all of those. So, and it gets into a bunch of other blues. See here. Oh. So what I have to do is sort of lay out. I'm just going to use these squares just as they are. So I'm going to lay it out on my table how I want to put these out. And since they're already 10 by 10 squares that are all the same size, I can easily lay this out. And so let's go over to the big cutting table, and I'll show you all of these laid out. So we're here at the giant cutting table, and since I have a mix of grays and blues, I'm going to want to make sure that I don't put too many close together. The grays right next to each other, the blues, I want to mix it up a little bit. Here's where having a layer cake of these fabrics really helps, because all of these are coordinating in a way. So I know it's all going to go together. I'm not throwing in a weird color, a red one or whatever. I could mix in some of those red ones I had, or you might get a pack where they go together but they're different colors. I'm just going to lay these out and see what I get. Now, something I've already noticed is they're not exactly square. These are cut in an interesting way, more, you might want to square these up before you do it, because they're not cut exactly square. That's something you have to worry about when you're buying layer cakes from different manufacturers, is they might not actually cut them exactly square. These aren't, so you're going to want to be careful about that. So you could go ahead and square them up, or just realize that they're all the exact same size, they're just not squared. So I'm going to use them as rectangles. I need them all going in the same direction. So I literally can't put one here on top because it's not going to match over here, but I could turn it this way because they do actually match in that size. But again, I don't want 2 grays right on each other. So I'm going to sort of mix this a little bit, get some of the different color out of here. maybe get some of the blue in, and just making sure that I use the right arrangement. Now, right now I'm specifically organizing in mine in a way that there are no two blues together or two grays together. So it's almost becoming a bit checkerboard, but I don't think it's too obvious. And of course I will have to, duplicate at some point. I want this to be a lap quilt size. And for me, that's typically like 48 inches wide by about 60 inches tall or something. That's not very big. Or you could go a little bigger. But so basically, if these are 10 inches wide, I'm going to need at least 5 rows across because they'll cut in, and probably 7 rows tall. So 5 by 7 is a good choice. Right now I have 3 by 3, and I'll just keep building. Now, I will have to repeat at some point, and so to do that, I want to make sure I sort of spread these out a little bit so they're not too obvious where the repeats are going to be. That's funny, I don't think I've used this one yet, so I'll put it in here. And I'm going to look back at this after I've sort of put all of these pieces in place, and it'll help me decide where I've maybe made a mistake or need to move some things around. All right, so I finished putting all of that together, and I actually ended up with 5 rows across and 8 rows tall, which I kind of like for what we're going to do. I may or may not add a border to this, but for the purposes of what we're doing, I think it makes sense to do just without a border, and we'll make this look really simple and easy for you to make if you're making your first quilt. Now that I've got all of these laid out, I want to look it over and make sure I don't have 2 of them that are right next to each other that are the same or too similar. So I wouldn't want these both to be the same blue or these to be the same grays. Or maybe there's the light grays here are too much to have this much light gray next to each other. Or maybe the size of the pattern is too small, and I think a bunch of too small patterns next to each other maybe should get moved around a little bit. I have a couple of extra blue ones from the mix that are in the blue look. And I could decide to change out one of the blues if I felt like it might look better to have something lighter or stronger. I wouldn't put this here though, because remember this is the exact same fabric as this one. And so that would look a little strange. And actually I think that because these are the exact same pattern, just different colors, maybe I would change out this particular blue one and put in one that maybe was a different size pattern. And maybe that would allow me to say, well, do I want to move this here to get a different size, but then it would be the same pattern again there. So it's really the bouncing around of what makes the most sense to do. So I have to be real careful about where I put different ones. And if I move this one, will it be too close to one that's like it? So I actually think I kind of like the mix now. I'm gonna stick with this particular mix that I've done. And I'll have these 2 pieces actually that match left over. There's at least one of this in the design, so I think I'll leave it there. You see it up at the top? Same fabric up there. So I think I'll leave this design as it is, and I will use these for a different project. So now that I've done this, what I really want to do, so now that I've put them out like this, now I need to plan how I'm going to sew them together. And the choice there is to sew either in rows, sew all the vertical rows together, and then all of these get sewn together, and then you put them together, or you can do the other direction. It really just depends on what's easier for you. Because I have 8 going this way and only 5 going that way, I like the idea of sewing the 8s together, because what you'll do is you'll get 4 pieces of 2 being sewn together, if that makes sense. It's just going to be a lot easier for me to put together. So what I'm going to do is, because I always sew with the You're always going to sew on the right side of a piece of fabric as you go into your machine. I'm just going to flip over the tops to the side here, these, in sections of 2, knowing that I'm going to start at this corner and sew down. And then to make it easier for myself, now, one of the things you might want to do before you start this is take a picture of your layout, like what we just laid out, and make sure that you are happy with the layout, and then you can reference it later. So now I have these sections that are all going to be sewn on the side here. I can then layer them one on top of the other. And because they are right sides together, I've piled them up right sides together. I know I'm going to start on this far right side. You could even put a pin in here, and that would help you know that this is where you're starting. We're going to sew down, move it, sew the next one. Let's go to the sewing machine. So we come directly from the table. We have our items laid out. And of course, I'm going to start at this top right corner. And the easiest thing for me to do is to literally just line these up and sew down the edge. So I will line them up. Now remember, because these have pinked to them, we're going to pick a seam allowance that we want to run along the edge. I'm going to set a little bit wider than 1/4 of an inch because I'm a little worried about getting too close into that pinking. Now, I'm using a shorter stitch length on my machine, quite a bit shorter, because I don't want these stitches to come out when I'm manhandling it. And I'm sort of running my presser foot right along the inside cut of that pinking line. I'm going to stitch off of there and bring my next set in. And again, these are right sides together, facing each other. And I'll just line them up again and just butt it right underneath there and keep going down. This is called chain piecing. I'm chain piecing this, meaning I'm not cutting in between, I'm just assembly line sewing it, and it's creating a chain of this stitching that goes through all of them. And because I'm using a very short stitch length, I'm not worried about back tacking at the top and bottom. I'm just letting it go in. Now, if it helped, you could put a guide on here that would hold, because these aren't chopped, these haven't been cut exactly square with a square exact straight line on the side, I'm not worried about trying to run up against a guide. I don't know how it would do that anyway, how well it would do it. And then when you get off the end of that, you're just gonna cut your threads, either pull them out and clip them, or you can use the automatic thread cutter. Now what this means is that all of these have been sewn together. And when we take this back to the table, you'll see that all of these pieces have been put together, and we can come and do the next one. So we will lay this back on the table and we'll start the next set. So I have sewn each of these together, but the weird thing is, because of the way that I chain pieced them, in fact, I need to, oh, this is fun. So I made a little bit of a mistake, and because I wanted to show you a way to hold them still together. I sort of made a mistake by the way that I did them, because I really should have done them in a way that they would have, I should have stitched them. It doesn't matter what I did wrong. I'll show you how to fix it for the future. I'll get these laid back out here. So those have been sewn together. What I really should have done was sewed across the other rows in the other way. But if you did it this way, this is perfectly fine, because then you can now come in and sew these pieces together. So let's say I put these out this way. I now have 4 units I'm gonna fold over to this unit, fold over, and now I will sew these along the right-hand side, and it'll give me 2 units that I will then sew together again. So let me go ahead and do that. So now I have those 2 units that have been made, and by coming back to the table, I now lay out a unit of 4. You'll see how much it's shrinking up now because I've been taking that 1/4 inch seam allowance out of each one, or a little bit more. So those are now ready, and I can fold here, and I'm going to stitch along this side, and this will make one entire long unit that will be ready to go to the iron. Let's sew this first, and then I'll meet you over at the iron. All right, so I finished that process, and now I'm at my iron, and the job is going to be to go ahead and iron all of this open flat. I'm going to iron everything in one direction. So this was the bottom of my quilt. So I'm going to flip it over and iron everything toward the top, and then I'm going to alternate that between rows. So the rows that are these odd number rows is row number 1. I'm going to iron everything to the top. And when it's time for row number 2, I'll iron everything to the bottom. That's going to let us nest those into one another. So I'll just get my iron. I'm going to go on the other side of this ironing board, and I'm going to angle everything to the top. Since this is the very bottom fabric, I'm going to go that way. And so the best plan is to, well, I've got to turn the iron on. I'm going to use a little bit of steam too, but it's important to know I'm going to get it pressed flat first and then set the seam with some steam. The reason that is I don't want to change this in its overall shape. I don't want to cut it out of that 90-degree angles that we had. So I'll go and just give it a press this way, make sure it's been flattened out, and then I'll add some steam once that part's done. The same thing here. I'll make sure that I just lightly tug this fabric over to make sure it's putting in a straight seam, press it flat, and then hit that steam out of there. And because these are only 8 pieces of fabric long, it's not going to be difficult or very long to do this. Now, I've only done 1 row of these 8 fabrics so far. It would be easier if you just did all the rows at the same time, sewed them all, and then got them to this point so you can just press them all at the same time. I'm just pulling it over and continuing. Making sure I just lightly tug this to get it nice and flat. This is a great quilt if you've got to go to a baby shower or a housewarming gift and you want to bring something. You can do this pretty fast. All right, we're going to go ahead and get the others going, and I'll lay them back out on the table and show you how it goes. All right, so I finally have all of those rows laid out. The first row here has been completely done, but the others are just stacked up ready to sew. One of the things that you can do is use a friction pen. I'll put a link in the description below. This is a pen that is either erasable with water or with heat. And when you're ironing, it's easy. I'm gonna mark each one of these to show that they are row 2, row 3, row 4, row 5. And that'll be a lot easier. And all I'm gonna do is on the back of the fabric here. So I'll put right at the top here, row 2, row 3, row 4, and row 5. So you'll see I've put a 2 in the corner. It might be hard to see, it's in purple right there. And I'm gonna start sewing these together. Well, that's number 2 done. Let's move on to number 3. All right, so there we are. We've got our entire quilt laid out in rows. I've done the rows up and down. Let me turn you around. Let me see this a little better. We've done all of those rows. So each row is put together. There's 5 rows. So then what I have to do is I need to flip a row onto the other and stitch down the entire side. Now, you might remember that I ironed all of these going toward the top of the quilt. And on the second one, the one below, I had ironed all of them going down to the bottom of the quilt. And I'll show you when I get to the sewing machine how this is going to help us. So, I've got it all laid out. I have folded over this row to this one. And now I'm going to sew all the way down this side. And I'm going to take my friction pen and just make myself a note that I need to start at the top, and I'll put an arrow going down. So now I've got an arrow drawn on the top of it. I wonder if you can see that easily. I've drawn my arrow, and I'm going to stitch all the way down the side of this. Let's go to the machine. All right, so I'm here at the machine, and I've got that arrow right here at the top facing down. I'm going to get some pins because what I want to show you is how I'm going to pin here at these points to make sure that they stay. So what I'm going to do is go to where I had placed all of those stitches on this first row. I had pushed all of the seams going up. And on the other row, I had pushed all of the seams coming down. So what I can do is take these 2 seams and lay them into each other. So I've got that one, it's going down, so it makes a bump on this side. And on this one, it's going up, and it makes the bump on this side. I can literally nestle them right into each other, and they will lock. You'll actually feel them lock into each other, and see what happens? They lock right there. And then just to hold it, I'll put a pin right through that point, because I want them to line up as close as I can. And as I go down, I'll lock all of them together. Now you could do that in advance if you wanted. Now this is the point where some of the stitching, some of the things might not line up. We're gonna trim this whole thing up later after we do it. So I'm not worried about if the top and bottom don't exactly line up. So I'll place it under here using the same seam allowance that I did before. Now you have 2 options when you get to the pin. You can either hold it and take the pin out, or you can very slowly go over the pin. Important to know, only do that if you're wearing proper eye protection and you feel comfortable. I always suggest you take the pin out, but sometimes I forget. So I'm gonna take the pin out, hold this together with my finger, and just go over. And I'm gonna keep going, but what I am gonna do down here is go ahead with my hand and put these 2 together, nestle them together, and then pull this back. Give it a little closer ring. Pull this back so that I make sure that I'm working toward that proper seam, just so I can get the squares to line up the way I want. And now I'm not going to pin that because I can feel it with my finger that it's still nestled in together. And I'm going to keep going, and then I will show you what that looks like in a second. Now here's an interesting part. I have now held these together with my fingers, and it's obvious that there's a little extra fabric on the top than there is on the bottom. So I'm just going to kind of pull the bottom and then massage this top fabric to make sure that it goes in. So I'm going to hold it right here down and let that top fabric slowly work its way in. It's something you just have to do a few times to really get a feeling. So I want you to see what this looks like now here on a seam that we nestled, and when we open it, They should be really close to being a square in there, here where these 4 come together. Let's see the top one that we did. You see how it becomes a square right there where those 2 come together. And you want to get as close as you can on this particular quilt. I am going to show a quilt in the future that uses rickrack to cover over those squares, and then it doesn't really matter if they line up perfectly or not. I'm just going to keep doing this down the quilt, just making sure that I lock my seams in, remembering that the one on top, the seams are going toward the top of the fabric, and the one on the bottom, the seams are going down. I also want this to look like a very, just a handmade, not quite handmade, but you know what I mean, a very personally made item. So I'm not worried if everything is super exact. If these squares are off a little bit, it's not going to hurt anyone. No one's going to be upset by that. And we're going to use our iron to work out some of the issues that we may have once we lay it all flat. Off that there. You see how that kind of zoomed off a little bit? I'm going to go back and just fix it properly. You also probably would not use black thread for this quilt if you were doing it for a gift for someone, because the quilt fabric, that black thread might show through on the top. I am going to be giving this to a dear friend who's not even going to notice, because I'm going to probably use a blue thread, a light blue thread, to quilt the entire top of it. And I think that should go in. Also, by using a small stitch length, it really isn't going to show through unless you really pull these fabrics apart. But there we go. We've got both of those together. Let's put them back on the table and get the next 2. All right, so before I put this onto the table, I am going to iron it real quickly. And it doesn't matter which way I iron this, because we're not having to sew any other squares together. So I can literally just get it to my iron and press it. I am going to sort of flatten it out and then give it a good amount of steam. Just go along, making sure that it is pressed nice and flat. I made a video a couple of weeks ago called 10 Things I Wish I'd Known When I Started Sewing. And this was one of them, that you really should use your iron to press things and make them look good. It is going to make a big difference to what you create. And it will make this whole thing feel just a little bit nicer. It'll lay flatter when you're finally finished. And this is not the last time that we're going to touch this whole thing with my iron. So right now I'm not worried about getting every wrinkle out, but I just wanted to get that seam set. So now I can take this back over and lay it out. Ooh. So the next thing is to flip this one over. And again, I'll put a big arrow going down. If you remember that arrow that was here, it's gone because I used the iron and it completely disappeared. Arrow going down, and I'll sew these 2 together. So now that I've got 4 rows sewed together, 2 and 2, I've got to get this last one on. And I'm going to sew this one directly here first to make a 3 set of rows and a 2 set of rows. So I'll still do the same thing. Flip this over onto it and draw a mark and go down. All right, so as I flatten this out, our last step is literally just to sew down the edge of the two, and we'll have a completed fabric quilt top. Well, there is this beautiful quilt top that I made, which is 5 by 8, and this works out to roughly 48 inches wide by 72 or 70 inches long. Perfectly big enough for a bed, for like just an extra blanket, not one that would cover the whole bed, but perfectly good for like if you're laying on the couch or sitting in your favorite chair. It'll cover really sort of here down past your feet and toes. You could make this a bigger quilt by adding a border all around the outside. I don't think I'm gonna do that on this one. I wanna make this still a tutorial where you get to see how to make a very simple quilt easily. Maybe this is your first quilt that you put together. And if that's the case, it's great because this one just used a pre-package of fabric. Now, had these been real squares, exactly 10 by 10 squares, this would be a tiny bit taller. Unfortunately, it wasn't that when we measured it, but they were all the same size. So it was able to go out to this, meaning that you didn't need to do any measuring or any cutting. This was a pack of 42 pieces of fabric, and there are 2 pieces left over, which is nice. I'll use for something else. But the way it is now, this is how this is laid out. I'm gonna end this video here. In a future video, I'll show you how to actually put it together into a quilt, to put the sandwich to the backing fabric, and how to bind the edge around the outside. But until then, I think it's just nice if you want to do something like this. This took me about 45 to 50 minutes to do. And that a lot of that was just making sure it was lined up in the right way and getting it ironed properly. So really, even if as a novice sewer, this might take you a couple of hours, but really to have an entire quilt top finished in just a couple of hours is pretty impressive. Some of those really intricate quilts you see take months and months and months. So you could get one easily done this way. I'll show you an easy way to bind it together, to put it together, and how to quilt it in a future video. And until then, stay crafty. Bye for now. Now, do I want to put a border on this? I don't think so, because I really want to get it done soon, because I can think of the perfect person to give this one to.